Welcome back to my channel. I wanted to do a part two today. So I did a video recently on soul contracts, and I just, based on the feedback and just some of the things that have been coming to my mind and the client sessions that I'm experiencing recently, I feel like I need to do a deeper dive into the soul contracts and explain it a little bit further. I think that aside from our own individual healing journey, I think that the dynamics of interpersonal relationships within this realm and probably other realms, even higher dimensions and higher densities, there can be conflict, albeit I perceive that they navigate through the challenges way different than we do for a lot of reasons, which I can get into. But interpersonal relationships coming into a physical form with a set of variables that are known and unknown, things that you can control and things that you can't control, can be quite a delicate experience, which makes it ever-changing and makes the free will element interesting because things aren't always going to go to plan. So I believe right now, specifically more than ever before, because so many people are activating or being forced to bring to their awareness their healing traumas, just their limiting beliefs and so many things. The way we respond to that and the way that we look at one another, regardless of the connection of the soul contract, it's making it it's making it even more challenging. And I'm going to try my best today to explain the elements that I'm familiar with and the things that I've learned, not only through my own life path, but from helping and guide others and mentor others through their soul journey, because I do have this beautiful opportunity. And I'm so grateful to work with so many people, so many clients that are all over the world. So it's not just limited to the American experience. And with that experience that I have had, and I continue to have every single time I work with a new client, which is every week, most days of the week, I get in, my perspective broadens even more, and I start to see patterns, and I start to things start to make a little bit more sense to me. So I want to get in a little bit deeper today into the soul contracts and why we're being challenged more in this time frame than we have previously, even with previous generations. I always talk about this timeline is like a main artery. This is what I also refer to as a dominant timeline. There are many parallel versions of what's happening right now, all at the same time. There is no such thing as past, present, future. So in essence, all the lifetimes that you've had before this, all the lifetimes that I've had before this, are really all taking place at the exact same time. Atlantis is happening right now, and Lemuria is happening right now. Everything really is happening in the quantum anyway, all at the exact same time. So they're just like a bunch of timelines just parallel to each other. Some are on hyperspeed, some are really illuminated, some are losing momentum, and perhaps they're dissolving. And I saw actually, I don't want to ruin it for anybody, but I saw Deadpool, Wolverine recently, and they did a really good job depicting the multiverse and how universes and specific timelines over time can fizzle based on certain events, and the momentum and the energy in a specific timeline can really start to dissolve. And I believe that that does occur, and they did a really good job of depicting that. So where we are right now is these versions of ourselves. So we can have, like, I had a session with a woman recently where I was shown there's 53 versions of herself, all experiencing time, lives in Earth 3D in this matrix, all at the same time. And as the person she is right now, currently in this life, in this timeline, as the dominant artery timeline, she is feeling this heavy burden of ancestral healing and all of these traumas and not unresolved fears, irrational fears that are stemming from these other timelines that are bleeding through. And so her whole life, she's been terrified of things that make no sense, that she doesn't have a prior experience necessarily. But it's very real to her even to this day. And this happens. I mean, she's not the only one. I hear about this all the time. And I believe the same thing has happened to me as well. So there's a lot going on. There can be many versions of you. There is likely many versions of you experiencing many different things all at the same time. And then there are also a lot of starseeds that are first timers here or haven't been here in this era or the last couple thousand years, that maybe were here during Lemuria or Atlantis, and have not been here for a very long time and have come in now to be part of this artery timeline that I talk about, this Ascension period, to guide us on the principles and philosophies that worked at one time, and they're back to kind of coach us and guide us on those again, or philosophies and principles and guidelines of the Lyrans, for example. And there's a heavy set of Lyrans coming in right now. There are a lot of supernovas. Supernovas seem to be struggling the most right now, and they're really the older generation. 50 to 75 or something like that are the majority of the supernovas that I've met anyways. And they really have struggled their whole life to connect with anyone or anything or any activity. Nothing seems fulfilling to them. They've never found their place. They are literally the only ones in their life. No one understands that they don't have anybody else. They don't connect with their families, their friends. They're very different. They think different. They struggle so much, and they're so lonely, and they might even have children and a husband or a wife, and they're surrounded by people, but they still don't feel like they fit in anywhere, and they're very misunderstood a lot of the time. So they just kind of recluse and keep to that part of them to themselves, but it's really a struggle for them their whole life to kind of maintain this facade of, oh, I'm happy, but really inside I'm just dying because nobody gets me. And supernovas generally are not even from this universe. They come from another universe, a parallel universe, they have experienced some sort of an ascension period, but the collapse first. They've learned a lot from that, and they come in because we're having a similar experience, and they come in with that knowledge. So they're their souls are very strong and powerful and warriors, and they don't give up easily. And so I always tell supernovas, only the strongest that is volunteer for this role, because it is a lonely life. It is very difficult, very challenging. And oftentimes people in supernova group find themselves asking the question of, what's wrong with me? Why am I being punished? Why am I being blocked? And they're not. You volunteered for this because you're so advanced and you have so much to contribute. Even if you're not out in a public way speaking, like myself, or writing books or doing anything, just you're anchoring your light and shifting the frequency and being near people, that there's a passive ripple effect or a vibrational exchange where supernovas and other starseeds, and this is not just unique. I mean, this is how a lot of us affect change, by shifting the energy with our frequency. So that's not just unique to supernovas, but a lot of the supernovas are kind of in the background feeling like, well, how am I making a difference if not really doing much to be of service to humanity? But they are, simply by being present here and holding space and just being there for their grandchildren. This is not unique to supernovas, but I'm seeing a lot of contracts that's skipping a generation, where the grandparents either have been awake their whole life or went through a massive awakening later in life. Their children that they brought through are very connected to 3D and struggling a little bit to open themselves up to the idea of ascension, and not the idea, but what's happening, and going within, and that spiritual side is very dormant. But then they bring in children, and these starseeds are really incredible and psychic and saying things that are blowing their parents' minds, and grandparents are supporting and connecting the grandchildren, but there's a conflict between the parent and the grandparent, because the parent is not open to that. But so the grandparent and the grandchild are bonding, and there's a synergy there, but in the parent, is in the middle. And so I believe that on both ends, they're there to activate the parent in that situation. The children are there to open and awaken their parents, where the grandparents are there to make sure to support the grandchildren so they don't feel alone, so they can support them activating their parents. There's a lot of dynamics. I mean, I could talk for 3 days and do just a workshop just on soul contracts, because it's not really that simple and it's difficult to explain. And I want to do it in a way that's very clear. And so what I'm seeing the most right now is the division. So what I want to speak about today is really about the soul contracts that are not necessarily working out for many reasons. And when do you cut the cord? When do you pull back? When do you potentially block people from your life or wish them well? That's what I want to talk about today, because there does happen to be a large theme of that right now occurring all over the world. Again, I see it almost every day with my clients. They're not on the same page as their spouse, or children who have been the black sheep their whole life, or had a tumultuous relationship with their parents, are finally deciding to create boundaries and walk away from their parents. There's so many dynamics. So I want to go through it a little bit. I explained it in the last video, but I want to talk a bit further and explain what's going on. Because if you are coming into this life, let's say to learn something, is one thing. But this is also the timeline where people are gaining their power back. And so they're not necessarily here to learn about abandonment for the 100th time. But this is the timeline where they're getting their power back. So they're agreeing to experience abandonment one more time, so that in this life they call their power back and they respond differently to a situation like that. So it's less about learning the lesson. They've already learned the lesson. This is about persevering through the lesson and moving on and healing from it. So there's a good mixture of people in this timeline that are here to experience something that they've already experienced many, many times before. And then there are people who are just agreeing to learn certain things, and they have soul contracts with people that are volunteering to play the role of the antagonist, or whatever it is that they need to achieve that lesson or learn it. So let's talk about those who are kind of trapped in the cycle first. So we see a lot of abandonment, or enslavement. Actually is probably even bigger. So we'll talk about enslavement, but you can insert anything like ad libs that I'm saying, and you can relate it. It works for anything. So let's talk about enslavement. So I've seen this a lot. I'm not bashing men, but I'm just going to make it one gender to make it easy for myself. And this is true in my sessions. A good majority of the adult women that I work with have had many lifetimes where on some level they were in an enslavement system, and their what's the word? Their handler believed from one lifetime at some point in a very powerful way that they owned that person. Maybe at the time they did purchase them, and legally, not legally, but literally is what I mean. Like these women were rounded up and sold out to certain men, certain families, things like that. So they were owned by them. It's like a slave. And treated very poorly in the most horrible ways. And then because of the recycling loop of the third dimension matrix, people who are in those suffering lives tend to come back in, and when they die, they get put in the right place. They go to the void, the negative void, and they hang out there until they are needed back, not for good, but from the dark side. It could be right away. That's why some people incarnate immediately, and then others might be sitting in the void for a while, depending on what they need. This isn't happening anymore. So anyone watching me say this for the first time, try not to panic, because the void is breaking down and no new souls, they're being rescued, and this is not occurring anymore. But it has. And so the one, let's say that the person dies in that life, maybe from a tragic way, maybe not, comes back in, and now is placed back in with the same network of souls, and that one handler might be their husband again in the next life, or a slave owner, like a slave owner, or maybe he has many wives, or maybe he is the handler of her with trafficking and something negative like that. And so she's not really connected to him in a romantic way, but he controls her. So there's lifetime of lifetime of lifetime with this one or few. Sometimes I see it with family networks where they come in this life, and now it's up to this person that the soul wishes to come into this ascension timeline to heal from all of that, and is going to face her handler or handlers in this life. And they could be their dad, they could be their mother, they could be their spouse, are the main ones, but sometimes they can be a sibling. But generally, it's one of the ones I just mentioned. So now they're going to come back in this dominant timeline, still having these other lifetimes where they're being abused really simultaneously. But it's this life is this timeline is a dominant timeline. This is really complicated, and their role is to break free of the abuse by standing in in this case, in her power. Let's say it's a husband. So now she's in a narcissistic abusive relationship. Maybe she has several children with this person. And since, their whole marriage, she's been abusive, and really not really, maybe physically abusive, and verbally, and in many ways narcissistic, maybe an addict, or maybe he's an alcoholic, whatever the variables are in the situation. She's going to endure the abuse willingly, in the sense that she chose to come back with this person, regardless of whether that soul that's playing the abuser is truly trying to let her go, or still believes in this timeline that she's owned by him. She's owned by him. Yeah. Doesn't really matter. The point is that we don't know. We may not always understand their intentions, and maybe their intentions were pure coming in, but then when they came in here, they forgot, and they just became just as nasty, for many reasons. So she's faced with a journey now of, am I going to stand up and reclaim my power? And until she does, she's going to endure abuse from this person. And so she can choose to be with this person for several years, or 20, 30, 50 years. And what happens if she remains with this person her entire life, and then perhaps she passes on, then her soul will advance in another way. But we're talking specifically remaining alive in the lifetime together, and making choices using your free will. So this whole life is about people coming into your life now. She'll have soul contracts with people that are just like, are seemingly like angels, and they'll come in, and these strong friendships and opportunities, like little synchronicities, little opportunities to help her feel like she can do it, and or signs. And maybe she's chosen a really hard and difficult path, and she has no lifelines, and she's like, I'm going to do this all on my own. And those generally tend to be like the single moms who leave a very difficult abusive relationship, and might even be homeless on the street for a while, and they slowly get their life back together, or they may not. I mean, again, it's not the same story for everybody, but the point is, we choose who's going to come in to help us and who isn't going to come in and help us. So it's generally the variables are very layered and stacked, and we don't have a conscious remembering or knowing at the moment. So the issue a lot of times is when we're in the 3D, we have all these other variables that are not controlled. We cannot control them, and we're bombarded by the convolution of the 3D, and what I refer to as 3D influence and 3D interference that is unique for this matrix, which makes everything more challenging, because then we also have gatekeepers, and we also have shadow beings, and we also have entities that hover over the matrix, and they get pleasure, and they feed off of the challenges, the abuse, the murders, the addiction, the arguments, the fights, the rage, the wars, the battles, and the sadness and the guilt and the shame, all of those things give off a frequency, and it's food to them. We know that as loosh. So when we're in an environment with all this 3D interference, all of this illusion, all of this bombardment of programming and negative frequencies, and then you have entities like vultures, flying around, waiting to swoop down and attach to somebody that's in an ideal frequency that they like specifically. That could be guilt and shame. And another one loves when someone's in the rage mode and super pissed off. Probably they like road rage people. So they'll hover around people driving over the highway. And when they find one that's giving off this really pissed off energy of road rage, then they'll come in and attach to that person. It could be temporary until the person cools off and their vibration shifts, and they're like, oh, I don't like this person anymore. I'll go find the next one, and they just hop around. Or that person might just be kind of a jerk all the time and angry, and then that's how they follow you home, and they remain with you, and they could become a permanent resident in your field, unbeknownst to you, but you are not shifting or changing. So they kind of are hitchhikers or things like that. So those are all of the negative influences. But let's talk about the pure soul contracts, where people are really just genuinely coming in with groups or individual souls and saying, I want you to teach me. I'd like to learn the lesson of something. Like I talked about in the last video. Let's do a husband and wife, and the wife, or let's say the husband. Now we'll switch roles. Let's say the husband has had many lifetimes where he's felt disempowered or treated poorly. Maybe he's had a lot of negative feminine influence. Maybe they were part of occult families or something like that, and was put down a lot, and just had terrible experiences with control and manipulation from women, and being overpowered. And then, so this person comes in to this life, maybe with an angelic being, or somebody that may not have been in the other lifetimes, or maybe they have. There's infinite possibilities, so it's really hard to narrow it down. And the other person, the woman, says, okay, I'll play the role of the pseudo-abusive spouse that will put you down and control you with boundaries. I mean, that's usually the plan. They don't go overboard. They just do enough so that the person can experience it. And then their role likely is to walk away from that person, or stand in their power. And they might have the soul contract where the spouse will then back down, and they are able to work it out. So it's not always you have to leave the person. Sometimes we have soul contracts just to stand in our power, gets the attention of the other person, and they say, oh, wow. And then they learn something from it. So it's mutual. One's learning to stand in their power. The other one's learning to lessen their power because they've had the opposite experience. You can see how this really gets convoluted, and it's hard for me to cover all the bases. What happens in that situation is that the person who is experiencing dominating women, before he even meets the spouse, his whole life up until that point, at 20 years old, 25 years old, 30 years old, he's going to meet that person that comes into his life as his wife. So what happens between the time he's born and the time his wife walks in has a big impact on, is he going to be ready or in a position to follow through with his end of the healing process with the wife when she steps in. Maybe this soul experiences extreme abuse from his mother in the lifetime. Maybe she's narcissistic. Maybe she abandons him. Maybe all of these elements happen up until she comes into his life. And maybe he does have soul contracts with all these people, but he doesn't have time to process in between. So we can have short-term contracts with, let's say he says, okay, I'm gonna have 3 girlfriends before she comes into my life, and they're all going to do the same thing. And the idea is with each one, I will learn something and I'll grow from it, and I'll experience some level of control and manipulation. And then the idea is that it doesn't work out, and I learn something, and then the next one comes in, I'm better prepared, and I learn something from it. And then the next one comes in, and I recognize it right away, and I say no. This is how generally things are planned ahead of time. But let's say the mom played her role a little bit too well, because of her own traumas from her childhood up and leading up until her soul contract with her son. So now, and maybe she was abused and many other things. So she's very, very nasty to him, very abusive, or very absent, whatever those variables look like in that situation that I'm making up. And then by the time he has the first girlfriend, he doesn't have the confidence to break up. So it lingers and the contract lasts longer, and he's not learning the lessons because he feels even lower and less of himself instead of learning something from that relationship. So now it's compounding. And then maybe she leaves him, and then he quickly finds another girlfriend. But now he's more desperate, in a desperate sense, to find somebody that so he can feel loved and wanted. So he latches on to another abusive person instead of learning something from that. Now he's just feeding into it. So it's like rapid fire, one after another, and there's no time to heal or process in between, and it just compounds and gets more difficult. So by the time the soul contract with the wife comes in, this person is traumatized, wounded, fragmented, and really not in a good place to be able to now endure the level of trauma that this other person is supposed to bring into his life so he can finally stand in his power and walk away. On the flip side of that, the same thing can occur for the woman that's supposed to be mean to him in this life and teach him something. Something similar could have happened to her, where same scenario, it's compounded, or rapid fire negative relationships in her life where she just becomes meaner and nastier. And so by the time these two finally meet, they're so far gone that they're not ready for each other. They're not ready for that soul contract because they haven't really healed anything. It's just now they're just charged with rage and anger on one end, and the male is too insecure and too wounded to be able to stand up for himself. So then they get together, and it can be disastrous. And so I'm seeing that a lot in the collective, where these two that are meant to be together, it's destructive on both ends. It's not a healthy relationship for anybody. There's not a positive energy exchange. It's one negative thing after another. And when I evaluate and I look into what's going on as a observer from a neutral perspective, and I'm looking at the soul contracts involved, and I'm like, this person is not fulfilling their end, or you have a lot more trauma that you haven't processed yet. So I try to look at the variables, but that's what's occurring right now. So a lot of people and it's resulting in a very abusive, non-productive soul contract. And that's where we are. When do you cut the cords? So I believe that we need to really trust our intuition and go within and decide, how much more am I willing to take from this person? Am I actually learning from this person, or is this a setback? Am I not growing and evolving in this relationship, in this experience? And then and I think part of the ascension right now is for us to use our discernment and make a choice to put ourselves first and say, in this situation, I think separation might be best, or boundaries might be best, where we need to pull back, because sometimes we need to heal separately before we can heal together in a healthy way. So that's why there is more separations and divorces and breakups than we've seen before. And you compound that on top of all of that with the awakening period, where people are activating and discovering their true self, and what they have blocked their whole life because they wanted to fit in, but now it's surfacing, and they're realizing that they're not connecting with their spouse anymore. They don't have anything in common, and they're evolving, and the spouse is not ready to evolve. Can be the same, or this can be a completely separate situation, where they've had pretty much a good relationship for many years, and they're okay, but then they're forced with this ascension period, and one is evolving, and one is shifting, one is changing, one is trying to heal, where the other one is really digging their feet deep. and they're resisting and they're not ready. And I'm seeing a lot of that as well, where it really doesn't have anything to do with traumas. It's just where they are in their soul's evolution. So I'm seeing this a lot in soul contracts where people agree to be with a spouse, not for the purpose of abandonment or any of that, just to be together during the ascension period so that one can help, they can either influence each other to evolve and grow and shift, or one will push the other. So they will on purpose resist and drag their feet and go the opposite direction to push the other person. So some people do have soul contracts. Many people have soul contracts for relationships not to work out, because this is the point in which the one is supposed to push the other to activate and awaken, where the other one was never meant to. And that doesn't mean that the other one is an evolved soul. They're just playing the role of the unevolved 3D person. But in reality, they're a very wise soul. But in this, they've forgotten that they're playing a role in this life. You can't discount all of these things. I mean, there's so much potential. There's so many potential variations. So that can occur as well. So sometimes people need to have a push. You know, I believe that there's a lot of what we call NPCs, non-player characters, in our reality right now, who are the ones that are the antagonists on purpose. They're the ones that had this done and that are saying the most ridiculous things. And they're just meant to push us and motivate us and to piss us off a little bit to be the catalyst of our awakenings collectively and individually. So there are those that are here to be a thorn in our side, not because they're bad people or and they have entity attachments, but it's just because that's the role they're playing in our life. So that's why it's hard. We can't really judge and get really pissed off at people because we don't know. I've just said all of this, and that's just like I scratched the surface of the convoluted nature of interpersonal relationships and agreements we have. There's millions of more algorithms and potentials beyond what I've even mentioned. So you can see already how complicated it can get. And I've heard so many variations in my sessions. That's how I even can formulate this conversation right now. So people also come into our life to play certain to play certain roles, and I think the children are doing that for us right now. So there could be a child or children in between two spouses that are splitting into two different directions, and the feeling is we're staying together for the children. But a lot of times the children are there as the catalyst for the split as well, or they just want what's best for their parents they want their parents to be happy. So they will, in some ways, give subtle signs, or not so subtle. They'll tell you if they're older, you know, I know you're not happy with each other. Now, just because you're saying goodbye right now doesn't mean it's goodbye forever. I've said this so many times in so many ways. I've even written it in a few of my books. It's not goodbye forever. It's just goodbye for right now. And that's not always the case. Sometimes you need to create clear boundaries, and it may be for the rest of your life. And maybe the soul contract with this person is done. But sometimes it's more complicated than that. So a lot of what I'm seeing as parent to child interpersonal struggles. So we have an adult parent that struggles because they're awakening and activating, and now they're looking at their 20, 30-year-old child or younger, and they're very 3D and they're very manipulated and programmed and indoctrinated, and they see it and they're like, I want to save them. I want to save my child. They're really struggling and they don't see it, and you're pushing these ideals and the awakening and ascension, and they're looking at you like that's BS and I don't believe in that, and I'm perfectly happy in my corporate job and I want more of these, and completely contrast. And we have to recognize as the parent that perhaps, or not perhaps, it's likely that the child, that soul that's playing the role of your child, is experiencing that for a reason. Maybe they want to experience that. Maybe they're playing the role for someone else in their life that has nothing to do with you. Maybe they need to experience that. Maybe they're infiltrating that movement that they're in order to shift it in some way energetically. again, there can be 1,000,002 variations or reasons why they're stuck. And so it's causing a division. So my best advice for those parents is to just let your child or children, in some cases, be who they are, and just support them no matter what decisions they make, because you want to always hold the space so that when the time is right, if the time comes, they will feel comfortable to come back to you when the seeds that perhaps you planted or others now have nourished and grown, they feel like they have a safe space to come back, and they're not going to hear the "I told you so's" and have a resistance or an animosity there. So really, it's about saying, I disagree, but I love you unconditionally, and I'll support you from a distance. I may not understand or understand your choices, or I might not be, I don't necessarily agree, but I support anything and everything that you choose to do. I'm always here for you. And that's a really hard thing to do, because remember, we don't own our children. We just have soul contracts with other souls that are equal, that are equal in consciousness, if that's even the way you say it. They're at similar density of consciousness, sometimes higher than ours. So maybe they chose to come in and struggle even more than we did to learn something even bigger or grander, or to be of service in some way later. And they need this experience in order to do that. Maybe they're going to be a high of a leader later, but they need to experience a real super low and to be infiltrated and integrated into negative 3D stuff that you're looking as the parent saying, oh, but they don't know how bad that is. Well, yeah, but maybe they need to experience that right now for later. We don't know. And sometimes there's like a rage in between the two, and it's gotten nasty, and now there's not a positive energy exchange. And in that case, I just say you love them from a distance, you create boundaries, and perhaps you need to separate for a year, 2 years, or maybe you don't have a long-term soul contract. I believe that I have certain family members in my life that I don't share specifics because it's my personal business, that were not long-term. And even though someone might be your sister or father, yeah, that's family for life, but maybe your soul contract is to be it's not the lifetime. It could be till you're 40 or whatever, and then you two walk away. And even though you're father and daughter, or mother and daughter, or brother and brother, or whatever, you aren't meant to be, you're not meant to have a relationship. So that does occur as well. That could be a heavy burden with the parent and child. On the flip side of that, I'm seeing a lot of awakened psychic evolved children with parents that are so old school, so programmed, so embedded in the 3D, that it's reversed. So again, the advice is the same. You love them for who they are, and try to understand that they're processing and learning, and maybe this is the lifetime that they're not necessarily meant to awaken in this lifetime. Maybe they are, but it has to be at their own speed, and they have their own free will, and they might be resisting. It has nothing to do with you. A lot of us take things so personal, where we think it's, we make everything about ourselves. And most of the time it has nothing to do with us at all. It's not us. So we got to stop making it about us. So if a friend betrays you, oh, yes, they were in the wrong in this situation, but maybe it has nothing to do with you. They're just working through something really difficult, and they lashed out at you because they felt like that you're safe to do that with, or your frequency is not suitable for them to sulk because you're in a higher vibration, and they're not ready. They need more time to be in that negative mindset for whatever reason. And if you're in a higher mindset, then they're going to resist you. Again, it's not your problem. It's not your fault. It's just one of those things. I want to talk about the notion of enemies too, because I did a post recently on asking God to reveal your hidden enemies, and some people's response was, well, are they enemies or teachers? And that is absolutely correct. And what I want to explain what I mean by enemies, because if you have a contract with somebody that's a friend, or anybody, coworker, child, whatever, and they're resisting in their evolution, their healing, or their contract with you because perhaps they have entity attachments or they're not in their right mind. Maybe they're fragmented because of traumas. Then they're not operating from a place of one within themselves because they're fragmented, and there's a lot of convolution and again, having nothing to do with you. What happens is sometimes they have this, what Middle Eastern culture refers to as like the evil eye, where they can't be happy for you for seeing that you are healing, evolving, shifting. Things are getting better in your life. You're making different choices. Your mindset's shifting. Now you're in a good mood. Now you're attracting abundance here and there. And they're still stuck. They're still anchored in their anger. Again, having nothing to do with you. That's their free will for whatever and many reasons. But then the enemy in them becomes them being jealous. Jealousy is a very low vibration. And what happens is they inadvertently, a lot of times, they don't even realize, but through their jealousy, that they can send that negative energy towards you or that person. And then that person can feel that. And then maybe bad things start happening to them. That's what psychic attack is. Sometimes psychic attack is unbeknownst to the person. I know that sounds crazy, but consciously they wouldn't wish ill will on you, that they're so wrapped up in their negativity that they don't realize that their negative thoughts or jealousy, that they wouldn't want you to hurt, like on a conscious, like in their conscious mind, they would never want you to be hurt, or they just can't feel happy for you. They just can't, no matter how much they try, they just can't be happy for you. So they inadvertently send negative energy of jealousy. And then sometimes bad things can happen to the person. Like, like the psychic attack could be minor things, or the entities that, if they have them, that are attached to them will attack you to push you away because they don't want them to be around you. The entities don't want them to be around you because there's a potential that you can influence them in a positive way and bring them out of that vibration. And the entities don't want that because they want them to stay where they are. They're pushing them, they're holding them there. And again, that's not your responsibility or your burden to bear to rescue them, because again, this is a free will space. And so we can't do the work for people. So if they can't pull themselves out, we can't drag them out. We have to allow people to learn the lessons for themselves. As hard as it is to watch people struggle, we have to think, oh, maybe they need this. Now, obviously, we're not going to laugh and watch them. And we're going to try, you're going to try in the beginning to help. But if there's a continued resistance, and maybe they start to be mean to you, or they block you, or they don't want you around, then you have to stop and say, okay, well, I tried many times, maybe more than I should have, but now I'm going to cut that cord, and I'm going to create boundaries, and I'm going to listen to their wishes, and their wishes for us to be together right now. And again, it may not be forever, but we don't know. So we just say, okay, I'm going to stay in this, I'm going to do what's best for me right now. So in essence, is that an enemy? It depends, I guess, on the variation of the energy they're sending to you, because then there are some that are so jealous. Perhaps you've had many lifetimes. This happens a lot with siblings, where they have many lifetimes together, and one sibling is like the breadwinner of every lifetime, and they're always getting the most attention, and they're always more attractive, and they always have better lives, and the other one is so resentful. So then they come in this timeline, and we're like, all right, we're going to heal all of that. So I'll agree to this, one sibling will agree to have more in one, like better looking or more healthy or whatever, have less struggles, and the other one sees that, oh, well, they always get what they want, and they always have everything, and I'm struggling. Okay, well, now they're coming into your life again to help you be happy for them, and then really turn around and realize it's not about them. It's about me, and instead of distracting myself by wishing I was them and had the same things and being upset about it, what can I do separate of them, because I'm my own person. And so we see a lot of this sibling rivalry, but sometimes it can be real dark and real nasty. And I've worked with clients where their sibling was sending the most nasty energy to them, and that in all aspects of what the word enemy is, they could be, because they've taken it too far and now their entities are attacking them. And I don't believe anyone signs up, for the most part, for it to be that extreme. So it's the extreme nature of the contract with somebody that creates the notion of enemy, if that makes sense. So sometimes it's just taken too far. And I've experienced that, where I'm like, all right, I know I don't deserve this, and I know I'm holding up my end of the bargain, and I don't need such a drastic, extreme response from that person. So it's clearly not about me anymore. This is not the lesson I asked for. This is something they're struggling with that, again, has nothing to do with me. So I'm going to separate myself. And so I give a lot of examples in my new book, Courage to Change the Freedom Movement, on how to cut cords, and how to create boundaries. This video would be way too long. If I went into that, I'd have to do another one, which perhaps I will. But basically, the idea is, the whole point of this video is, many people are faced with the decision right now of moving forward with a soul contract, or where they're moving forward in a soul contract. And is this the end for them? Again, there's no such thing as the end, but maybe in this life it is, but the unknown is scary. The potential of, I may not be with this person ever again, is a scary thought. And we have this feeling of, we don't want to abandon them. We don't want to give up on them. But just think, sometimes the best thing we can do for people who are resisting is to go away, so that they are forced to recognize their own struggle independent of you, so that they can make a change, they can make a choice, rather. And sometimes the best thing we can do for people is to say, I'm going to put myself first, and I'm going to go over here, and we need some space, or we need to divorce, or we need to separate. And it's the best thing that we've ever done for that person, because then they're forced to recognize and not hide anymore. So sometimes, it's the best thing for not only yourself, but it ends up being the best thing for them. So it's time, I think, and again, this circles back to the courage to change. It's all about going within, because the more you are strong in your healing and your convictions and your integrity, and you're standing in your light and you're grounding and you're in alignment with your highest version of yourself, only then will you truly be able to evaluate the relationships with contracts and with people in your life, and discern and make better decisions on whether it's the right move to do certain things. But if you're thinking from a low vibration of judgment, anger, resentment, or just heightened emotions, then you are likely to make the wrong choice, or stay too long, or leave too abruptly and give up too, like in either direction. So you have to go within. You got to do the work for yourself first, because when you are in the strongest version of yourself and you're more clear-headed, and then you'll be able to evaluate the relationships and the contracts in your life with certain people from a neutral perspective, from a different perspective. And then you'll be able to say, oh, okay, I could see what this person is teaching me. I can see why they're in my life. And if I just stop resisting, maybe I'll learn the lesson faster. Or it's convoluted. They're not helping me. They're holding me back, and I need to create boundaries. So this video isn't necessarily all about the bad stuff. Sometimes we have great soul contracts and people really teach us things, and it's beautiful. That's the idea. They're not supposed to be to the point where they are now, where we're separating. I mean, sometimes it's necessary, but I think with all of this, the heightened environmental convolution and negative energy and just the entities and things like that, it's just making it more challenging. And so more people are struggling through it. So I'm going to stop now, because I feel like I don't want to make this any longer. I'm going to lose people, but please let me know in the comments if this is helpful. And perhaps if I do another one, what area can I focus on? And if you found this helpful or not. It's otherwise there's no reason for me to make these videos. It's really for me to be of assistance as much as possible for people struggling right now. And I hope that this was helpful for you. I think I said everything I wanted to say, but probably didn't, because as soon as I stop, I'm going to say, oh, I should have said this, but that's okay. I think I said enough. So I hope this video has found all of you well. And until next time, I'll see you guys soon. Bye, everybody.